I'm Evelyn, 32 female. I live in a quiet one-bedroom apartment in the city, a place that has always felt more like home than the house I grew up in. By day, I'm a senior data analyst, a job that suits my personality. I find comfort in numbers, in patterns, and in the objective truth that data provides. For years, my life was a neat ledger of responsibilities, with the heaviest entry being the financial and emotional support of my family. This is the story of how I finally balanced the books. It's about the day I was pushed too far and the quiet, calculated decision I made to walk away, leaving them to discover the true value of my burden. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For as long as I can remember, my role in the family was clearly defined. I was Evelyn, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who got a sensible degree, secured a high-paying job, and never caused any trouble. My brother, Julian, was the opposite. He was the creative spirit, the free thinker, the one who was always chasing a new artistic passion that never quite paid the bills. Our parents, Mark and Alina, encouraged this dynamic. They saw me as the sturdy foundation upon which Julian's dreams could be built. My father, Mark, is a civil engineer. He understands structures, stress points, and load-bearing capacities. It's ironic that he could design a bridge to withstand a hurricane, but couldn't see the immense pressure he was placing on his own daughter. My mother, Alina, was a real estate agent before she retired. She excelled at selling a vision, at framing a property in the best possible light while glossing over the cracks in the foundation. She applied the same skill to our family, presenting a perfect picture to the outside world, a picture I was instrumental in maintaining. It started small. In college, I worked 2 jobs to avoid student loans, while Julian was given a generous allowance to find himself. After I graduated and started my career, the requests became more significant. Evelyn, honey, Julian's car broke down again. Could you help him out? He needs it for his videography project. Or, your father's overtime was cut. We're a little short on the mortgage this month. You're doing so well, it would be a huge help. Each time, I said yes. I transferred the money, paid the bill, and swallowed the bitter taste of resentment. I did it because I loved them and because I was conditioned to believe that this was my function. I was the family's safety net. My salary wasn't my own. It was a communal resource, funneled towards my parents' comfort and Julian's whims. When they decided to refinance their home 5 years ago, my mother sat me down. "Evelyn, the bank is being difficult," she'd said, her voice laced with manufactured concern. "Your father's job isn't as secure as it used to be, but with your income, if you were to co-sign and just help with the payments, it would be a formality. It's for the family." I hesitated. My friend Sophie, who worked as a financial advisor, had explicitly warned me against tying my finances to my family's. "Ev," she had said over coffee, "you're building your own future. Don't let them anchor you to their past." But the emotional pull was too strong. The thought of them losing their home, the place I grew up in, was a weight I couldn't bear. So I signed the papers. And for the next 5 years, a significant portion of my salary went directly to their mortgage. It wasn't a help anymore. I was paying half of it every single month, an amount they conveniently never mentioned to anyone. Julian, of course, contributed nothing. He was building his portfolio. My life became a series of spreadsheets. One for my own budget, which was perpetually tight, and one for the family's finances, which I was constantly bailing out. I missed out on vacations with friends, delayed my own plans to save for a down payment, and wore clothes that were years out of style. Meanwhile, Julian would show up to family dinners with a new drone or a state-of-the-art camera, gifts from mom and dad, purchased with money I had provided. He'd talk excitedly about his latest vision, and my parents would look at him with a beaming pride that was never directed at me. My achievements were simply expected. My promotions meant more financial stability for them. My bonuses were absorbed into the family fund before I even had a chance to celebrate. I existed in a state of quiet acceptance. The injustice of it all was a low, constant hum in the background of my life. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what good daughters do. I built a wall around my heart, convincing myself that their lack of appreciation didn't matter. I had my job, my apartment, and my one true friend, Sophie, who saw the situate. In for what it was. "They're using you, Evelyn," she'd state bluntly after I'd confess another wire transfer. "A safety net is supposed to be for emergencies, not a permanent hammock for a freeloader." I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to cut the ropes. The illusion of a happy, supportive family was one my mother had sold me my entire life, and I was still buying it. I didn't realize that Thanksgiving would be the day the sale finally fell through, and I'd be forced to see the property for what it truly was: condemned. The air in my parents' house on Thanksgiving was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering tension. It was the same every year. I would arrive early to help my mother in the kitchen, my arms laden with expensive side dishes I'd spent the previous night preparing. Julian would stroll in an hour late, empty-handed, and be greeted with enthusiastic hugs and praise for simply gracing us with his presence. This year felt different, heavier. The company I worked for had just announced record profits, and I had received a substantial end-of-year bonus. It was the kind of money that could finally change my life: a down payment on my own condo, a real vacation, a future. I hadn't told my family yet. A small, protective part of me wanted to shield it from them, knowing that they would see it not as my success, but as their windfall. Dinner was served, and the conversation, as always, orbited around Julian. He was detailing his latest project, a documentary about the city's pigeon population, speaking with the unearned confidence of a seasoned director. "It's all about capturing their struggle, their hidden majesty," he declared, gesturing dramatically with a bread roll. "It's a metaphor for the marginalized artist in society." My father nodded sagely. "That's wonderful, son. It's important to have a passion." My mother beamed. "Our Julian, the next Scorsese's, we're so proud of you, sweetheart." I sat in silence, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate. For 5 years, I had been paying for the roof over their heads, for the electricity that powered Julian's editing suite, for the very food on this table. Pride was a luxury I apparently couldn't afford. The conversation eventually shifted. My mother, in her passive-aggressive way, turned her attention to me. "Evelyn, you're so quiet today. Is everything all right at that computer job of yours?" "It's called data analysis, Mom," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "And yes, it's fine." "Well, it must be," she said with a sharp little smile. "It certainly pays well enough." It was a loaded statement, and we all knew it. It was her way of reminding me of my duty. But this time, it grated on my last nerve. "It does," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I just got my annual bonus, actually." A flicker of avarice crossed her face before being replaced by a mask of maternal interest. "Oh, how lovely, dear. We were just saying how the property taxes have gone up again." Julian snorted into his wine glass. "Of course, right on time. The Bank of Evelyn is open for business." He meant it as a joke, but it landed like a punch to the gut. The casual, mocking way he said it, as if my contribution was not a sacrifice but a funny little character flaw, broke something inside me. All the years of resentment, of feeling unseen and unappreciated, coalesced into a single point of white-hot anger. "It's not a bank," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "It's my life. It's my hard work." My mother's face hardened. Her pleasant hostess facade dissolved, revealing the cold, transactional woman I knew was always just beneath the surface. "Don't take that tone, Evelyn. You've always been fortunate to be in a position to help your family. Some people would be grateful for that opportunity." "Grateful?" I could hear my voice rising. "I pay for half of this house. I've put my entire life on hold to keep this family afloat while you pour money into his pigeon movie." The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at his plate, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Julian looked genuinely shocked, not that I was angry, but that I had dared to voice it. It was my mother who spoke, her voice low and venomous. "You watch your tone. You want to talk about what you do for this family? It's the least you could do. You have no idea the sacrifices we made for you. You were a difficult child, so serious, so demanding. You're just a burden, Evelyn, you always have been. A burden. The word echoed in the silent dining room. It was the truest thing she had ever said to me, because it was what she truly believed. My contributions weren't a gift, they were a tax levied on me for the crime of existing. All my efforts, all my sacrifices, were just payments on a debt I never knew I owed. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me. He just slowly shook his head, a silent command for me to drop it, to keep the P. Ace. Then Julian laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. She's got a point, he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. At least I make this family proud. That was it. That was the final crack in the foundation. The whole rotten structure came crashing down. I looked at their faces, my mother's cold fury, my brother's smug cruelty, my father's spineless silence. I saw them for the first time not as family, but as strangers I had been hopelessly entangled with. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my fork and knife down on my plate. The clink of silver against ceramic was the only sound. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and took my purse from the floor. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The argument was over. I had lost, but in doing so, I had won my freedom. I walked out of the dining room, down the hallway, and out the front door, leaving the scent of turkey and the wreckage of my old life behind me. I didn't look back. The cold November air hit my face, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, and my mind replayed the scene at the dinner table on a torturous loop. You're just a burden, Julian's laugh, my father's silence. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. By the time I walked into my apartment, the shock had begun to morph into a profound, hollow ache. I had expected my phone to ring. I anticipated a barrage of texts, angry messages from my mother, perhaps a half-hearted, guilt-tripping apology from my father. But there was nothing. The silence was absolute. The next day, Friday, came and went. Still nothing. Saturday, Sunday, not a single call, not a single text. It was in this deafening silence that I made a discovery. My family wasn't just ungrateful, they were punitive. Their silence wasn't an oversight, it was a strategy. They were waiting for me to crack. They expected me to come crawling back, tail between my legs, ready to apologize for my outburst and resume my duties as the family ATM. They had done this before on a smaller scale, giving me the cold shoulder for a day or two when I'd questioned an expense or hesitated on a payment. It always worked. The guilt and my desperate need for their approval would eventually wear me down. But this time was different. The words burden and proud had fundamentally rewired my understanding of our relationship. There was nothing to go back to. There was no happy family to preserve. There was only the truth, stark and ugly, laid bare on a Thanksgiving platter. That weekend, I grieved. I grieved for the family I thought I had, for the love I thought was unconditional. I cried until I had no tears left, curled up on my sofa with a blanket and the company of my own thoughts. On Sunday evening, I called the one person I knew would understand. Sophie, my voice was raw. Ev, I was just about to call you. How was Thanksgiving? Did you survive? The dam broke. I told her everything. The bonus, the pigeon movie, my mother's words, Julian's laugh, my father's cowardice. I told her about my silent exit and the even more silent days that followed. Sophie listened without interruption. When I was finished, her voice was firm but gentle. Good, she said. Good, I croaked, confused. What's good about it? You're out, Evelyn. You're finally out. They showed you who they are. Now you have to believe them. She paused. What are you going to do? I don't know, I whispered. I feel so, lost. Okay, she said, her tone shifting into the practical, efficient mode I knew so well. Let's start with what you can control. The money. You're still co-signed on that mortgage, right? And you've been making payments. Yes, for 5 years. I have it set up as an automatic transfer from my account on the 1st of the month. "The first is on Wednesday," Sophie stated. "The first thing you are going to do tomorrow morning is go to your bank. You are going to cancel that automatic transfer. Immediately." The thought sent a jolt of panic through me. But the mortgage, their house. "Their house, their mortgage," Sophie said, her voice unyielding. "Mark and Alina are the primary borrowers. You are a cosigner. They are fully responsible for the payment. You are no longer their safety net, Ev. Let's see how they handle a real financial storm without you." Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. My role as burden came with duties, and I was officially resigning. The silence from my family wasn't just a punishment, it was a release. They had severed the emotional ties. Now, it was time for me to sever the financial ones. The next morning, Monday, I felt a strange sense of purpose. I walked into my bank, my heart pounding, and sat down with a personal banker. I explained that I wanted to cancel a recurring automatic payment. The banker clicked through a few screens, located the transfer, and looked at me. "Th. Is a large payment, ma'am. Are you sure?" I thought of my mother's sneer. I thought of Julian's laugh. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I am absolutely sure." Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter than I had in years. The decision was made. The die was cast. Now all I had to do was wait. The silence from my family continued, a vast, empty space. They were playing their hand, confident in their power over me. They had no idea I had just changed the rules of the game. They believed I was sitting at home, miserable and contrite. They had no clue that I was, for the first time, looking at my own bank account and my own future with a sense of boundless possibility. The loudest silence of my life was about to be broken, not by me, but by the consequences of their own actions. The first week of December passed with that same unnerving quiet from my family. It was a week of profound change for me. Canceling the mortgage transfer was the first step. The second was a deep dive into my own finances, guided by Sophie. We sat at my dining table, which was now a command center covered in bank statements, spreadsheets, and cups of tea. It was time to conduct a formal audit of my life. "Okay," Sophie said, tapping a highlighted figure on a statement from 3 years ago. "This was the month your mom said the water heater broke. You sent them $2,000, right?" "Right," I confirmed, remembering the panicked phone call and the subsequent lean month I had endured. Sophie pointed to another statement, my parents', which I had access to from when I first set up the mortgage payments to ensure they were being applied correctly. Well, according to this, there was no $2,000 payment to a plumbing company, but there was a $2,000 transfer to a credit card account, and based on this purchase history. She squinted at the screen. It looks like that credit card paid for a weekend getaway at a luxury spa for two. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. It wasn't a mistake. The dates lined up perfectly. They had lied. They had taken my emergency funds, my sacrifice, and used it to pamper themselves. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "They wouldn't." "Evelyn," Sophie said gently, "let's keep looking." And so we did. For hours, we cross-referenced my transfers with their expenditures. The investigation revealed a pattern of deceit that was breathtaking in its audacity. The $500 I sent for emergency roof repairs had perfectly coincided with the purchase of a new high-end lens for Julian's camera. The $1,000 for my father's unexpected dental surgery had been used as a down payment on a new set of designer golf clubs for him. My contributions, which I believed were keeping their heads above water, were actually funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford and didn't deserve. Every transfer I had made out of guilt and a sense of duty was an entry in a ledger of lies. I saw my mother's text messages in a new light, her carefully crafted tales of woe designed to trigger my sympathy and open my wallet. I saw my father's passive acceptance not as weakness, but as complicity. He knew, he must have known. And Julian wasn't just a freeloader. He was the primary beneficiary of the entire scheme. His artistic lifestyle was built on a foundation of my money and their lies. The most damning discovery came when we analyzed the mortgage itself. When I co-signed, my mother had handled all the paperwork, assuring me it was just a formality. I had been young and trusting, so I signed where she told me to sign. Now, with Sophie's expert eye, we examined the digital copies of the loan agreement. "Oh, Evelyn," Sophie breathed, her expression grim, "this is worse than I thought." She pointed to a clause. By co-signing, I hadn't just agreed to be a guarantor. The way my mother had structured the application, using my superior income and credit score, had made me the primary financial pillar of the loan in the eyes of the bank. While my parents were the homeowners, my financial profile was what secured the favorable interest rate and the loan approval itself. But it was more insidious than that. They refinanced for $100,000 more than their previous mortgage balance, Sophie explained, her finger tracing the numbers. "They told you it was to lower their monthly payments, right?" "Yes," I said, my stomach churning. "Well, they did, but they also took out a massive amount of cash in the process. Look here." She showed me the disbursement record. A lump sum of nearly $100,000 had been deposited into their joint account the day the refinance closed. "What did they do with it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie navigated to their bank statements from that period. The picture became sickeningly clear. There was a $40,000 payment to a car dealership for a brand new SUV, the one they told me they got a fantastic trade-in deal on. There were tens of thousands spent on home renovations, not essential repairs, but cosmetic upgrades. A new deck for their summer barbecues, a remodeled master bathroom, a high-tech media room for Julian. They had mortgaged their home to its limit, using my good credit as the key, and then used the proceeds to finance a life of comfort and leisure. And then, they had the audacity to make me pay for it. The monthly shortfall they needed my help with wasn't real. My half of the mortgage payment was essentially covering the cost of the cash they had pulled out and spent on themselves. I wasn't just helping them stay in their home, I was unknowingly repaying a loan they had taken out to fund their desires. The wall I had built around my heart didn't just crack, it pulverized into dust. This wasn't a simple case of taking advantage of a willing daughter. This was a calculated, long-term, systematic financial deception. They hadn't just accepted my help, they had engineered the entire crisis that made my help seem necessary. They had turned my love and sense of responsibility into their personal line of credit. I leaned back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs. The grief I had felt after Thanksgiving was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was not family. This was a conspiracy, and I was the victim. "Sophie," I said, my voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was now sharp like a shard of ice. "What are my options, legally?" Sophie looked at me, a flicker of fierce pride in her eyes. "As a co-signer on the loan, you're still on the hook to the bank if they default, but they are the homeowners. The primary responsibility is theirs. Your first move, canceling the payment, was the right one. Now, we wait for them to make the next move." I nodded slowly, my mind processing the years of manipulation. The hurt was still there, a deep, cavernous wound. But something new was growing alongside it. Resolve. My investigation was complete. I knew the truth, written in the indisputable language of numbers. They had treated me like a line item on a budget. Now, I would show them what happens when that line item is deleted. The rage that followed my investigation was a clean, purifying fire. It burned away the last vestiges of guilt and obligation, leaving behind a steely determination. My plan wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I had no desire for screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. That was their style, not mine. My revenge would be quiet, meticulous, and absolute. It would be my absence. My success would be their consequence. The first part of the plan was to create an impenetrable fortress around my life, both financially and emotionally. With Sophie's guidance, I took the bonus that I had been so afraid to tell my family about and put it to work. I maxed out my retirement contributions. I opened a high-yield savings account and a separate investment portfolio. For the first time, my money was working for me, building a future that had no connection to them. The feeling was intoxicating. I took the money I was no longer sending for their mortgage, a staggering sum when I saw it sitting in my own account, and began to live. It wasn't about extravagant spending. It was about reclaiming the small joys I had denied myself for a decade. I bought a new winter coat because my old one was threadbare. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had wanted to do for years. I started exploring my own city, visiting museums and trying new restaurants with Sophie, activities I had previously deemed too frivolous. The second part of the plan was to address the mortgage situation head-on, but on my own terms. Legally, you can't just get your name off the loan without their cooperation or refinancing, Sophie explained. And they won't cooperate if it means their payments go up. So, we need to create leverage. Our strategy was simple: do nothing. We would wait for the bank to contact them about the missed payment. The first official notice would likely arrive around the 15th of the month. The pressure would build from an official source, not from me. This was crucial. It would prevent them from framing this as me being emotional or irrational. This was a straightforward business matter. A bill was due, and it was their responsibility to pay it. While we waited, I focused on myself. The pottery class was a revelation. The act of taking a shapeless lump of clay and molding it into something solid and useful felt deeply symbolic. I was reshaping my own life, no longer letting others dictate its form. I started sleeping better. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for years began to dissipate. I was excelling at work, my mind clear and focused now that it wasn't burdened by manufactured family crises. The third, and perhaps most important, part of the plan was preparing for the inevitable contact. I knew they wouldn't remain silent forever. Once the bank's letter arrived, the quiet would end. They would call, and I had to be ready. Sophie and I role-played the conversation dozens of times. "They will start with guilt," she'd say, mimicking my mother's wheedling tone. "Evelyn, how could you? We could lose the house." "Then they'll pivot to anger," she'd continue. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." "And finally," she concluded, "they'll try to manipulate you with your father. He'll be the good cop, trying to reason with you to get you to be the bigger person." For each scenario, we developed a response. The goal was to be calm, factual, and unmovable. My lines were simple and designed to offer no emotional footholds. "The mortgage is your responsibility. You will need to speak to the bank. My finances are no longer available for discussion." The most important line, the one that would serve as my final word, was the one I had imagined ever since that Thanksgiving dinner. "You should ask your pride and joy." During this time, I also took proactive steps to untangle myself further. I changed my phone number, giving the new one only to Sophie and a few other trusted individuals. I let my old number go to a cheap, pay-as-you-go phone that I kept turned off in a drawer, the burner phone, as Sophie jokingly called it. This was my new gatekeeper. My family's access to me was now cut off. They would have to leave a voicemail, and I would decide if and when to listen to it. I also drafted a formal letter with Sophie's help. It was a simple, factual document stating that as of the Thanksgiving incident, I was ceasing all voluntary financial support and that they should make arrangements to cover all their own expenses, including the full mortgage payment. It didn't mention the lies or the spa trips. It was cold, corporate, and irrefutable. We decided I would send this via certified mail only after they made contact. It would be my official response to their panic. As the middle of December approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had a plan. I had a support system in Sophie. I had a new life that I was building brick by brick. The fortress was complete. I was no longer the reliable daughter, the family safety net, the burden. I was Evelyn, a woman in control of her own destiny, and I was ready for the storm. They had assumed I would fold. They had no idea I had spent the last few weeks building a new spine out of steel. It happened on a Tuesday evening, December 18th. I had just come home from my pottery class, my hands smelling of clay and my mind blissfully empty. I checked the burner phone for the first time in 3 days. There were 7 missed calls and 1 voicemail, all from my father. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. I took a deep breath, walked into my living room and pressed play, putting the phone on speaker. My father's voice filled the quiet room, tight with a mixture of feigned confusion and genuine panic. "Evelyn, it's Dad. Please call me. The bank sent a letter. Something about the mortgage. It must be some kind of mistake, but it's saying the payment is overdue. We're getting charged a late fee. Call me as soon as you get this. It's urgent." He didn't sound like a concerned father. He sounded like a manager whose most reliable employee hadn't shown up for their shift. There was no, "How are you?" or "We're worried about you." It was straight to the money, just as Sophie had predicted. I waited a full day before responding. Let them stew. Let the reality of the situation sink in. The next evening, I called him back from the burner phone. He answered on the first ring. "Evelyn, finally, what is going on? Did you forget to make the transfer?" His voice was strained, accusatory. I kept my own voice level and calm, just as I had practiced. "Hello, Dad. No, I didn't forget." There was a pause. I could hear my mother muttering in the background. "What does she mean, she didn't forget?" "What do you mean, you didn't forget?" my father echoed, his confusion turning to irritation. "The payment is late, Evelyn. The bank is sending threatening letters." "I am no longer paying for half of the mortgage," I stated simply. "It is not my responsibility." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he struggled to process this new reality. "What are you talking about? Of course it's your responsibility, you co-signed," he sputtered. "We had an agreement." My agreement was based on the understanding that I was helping my family in a time of need, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the numbers on their bank statements. "I am no longer willing to provide that help." Suddenly, the phone was snatched away. My mother's shrill voice erupted. "Evelyn, you stop this nonsense right now. You are going to call the bank, you are going to pay the bill, and you are going to apologize for the worry you've caused us. After everything we've done for you, this is the thanks we get. You selfish, ungrateful child." The word ungrateful almost made me laugh. It was so predictable, so perfectly in character. "There is nothing to discuss, Mom," I said, my voice unwavering. "You and Dad are the homeowners. The payment is your responsibility." "We can't afford the whole payment," she shrieked. "You know that, we'll lose the house. Is that what you want? To see your own parents out on the street?" "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said coolly. This was the moment. The climax of their manipulation, the final, desperate play. But the fire inside me had burned away all the guilt. My father got back on the phone. His tone had shifted from panic to pleading. The good cop had arrived. "Evelyn, please," he said, his voice dropping. "Don't do this to your mother. Don't do this to us. We're family. We can talk this out. Whatever we did to upset you at Thanksgiving, we're sorry. Just, please fix this." His apology was as hollow as his silence at the dinner table. It wasn't for hurting me. It was for the inconvenience my reaction was causing them. "There's nothing to fix, Dad," I told him. "This is the new reality. You'll have to adjust." "How are we supposed to adjust?" he asked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Your brother, he can't contribute. He's trying to build his career." And there it was, the final, perfect catalyst. The mention of my brother, the pride and joy of the family, the one whose dreams were worth more than my own future. I had my closing line, the one I had been waiting to deliver. I took a breath and let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decade of injustice. "Why is the mortgage unpaid?" I repeated his own frantic words back at him. "I don't know, Dad." I paused for effect. "Ask your pride and joy." I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call and turned the burner phone off. I stood in the center of my apartment, the silence returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't the heavy, anxious silence of waiting. It was the clean, peaceful silence of a finished chapter. The confrontation was over. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had simply stated the facts and held my ground. I had taken back my power, not by fighting them, but by refusing to play their game any longer. The ball was now in their court. and for the first time in their comfortable lives, they were going to have to play with a partner who wouldn't foot the bill. The weeks after the phone call were a masterclass in escalation. They tried everything. My mother left a string of voicemails on the burner phone, each one more unhinged than the last. They ranged from tearful pleas about her health to venomous rants about my selfishness, even accusing me of trying to kill them with stress. Julian, for his part, sent a single, petulant text. "You really messed things up. Hope you're happy." It was so laughably self-involved that I did, in fact, feel a flicker of happiness. I listened to none of it in real time. Once a week, I'd turn on the phone, scan the messages for any legal threats, and then delete them. As per my plan, I sent the certified letter. The delivery confirmation was another small, satisfying victory. Now my position was officially on record. The real fallout began in January. I received a notification from the credit bureau of a missed payment on the mortgage account. It stung to see my perfect credit score take a hit, but Sophie had prepared me for this. "It's a small price to pay for freedom," she'd said. "And it's a mark against them, too. It will heal." The consequences for them, however, were far more severe. Without my half of the payment, they were critically short. They had no savings to fall back on. The investigation had shown me that. Every spare dollar had gone into their lifestyle and Julian's career. The bank's collections department began calling them daily. Around the end of January, I got a call on my new phone number. It was from an unknown number, and I answered cautiously. "Evelyn, it's Uncle Robert." My father's brother, a kind but distant man I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Your dad called me," he said, sounding troubled. He asked to borrow a substantial amount of money. He told me you'd cut him off out of spite and that they were going to lose the house." I took a breath. "Uncle Robert, I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. The story is more complicated than that." "I figured," he said with a sigh. "Your dad was always bad with money, and your mom, well, she likes nice things. He said you were being cruel." I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. "Uncle Robert," I said, "what I'm about to tell you is for your ears only. I don't want it to become family gossip, but you deserve the truth before you give them a penny." I told him everything. I didn't embellish or get emotional. I simply laid out the facts. The 5 years of paying half their mortgage, the lies about their financial emergencies, the discovery of the cash-out refinance, the spa trips, the golf clubs, the camera lenses. I told him about Thanksgiving. He was silent for a long time after I finished. "Good Lord," he finally murmured. "I had no idea. They always made it sound like you were doing okay, and Julian was the star." "That was the story they wanted everyone to believe," I said. "Well, thank you for telling me, Evelyn, and for what it's worth. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." He did not lend them the money. They tried other relatives, but the story I told my uncle had a way of discreetly making the rounds, not as gossip, but as a quiet warning. The wells of family charity ran dry. The final act came in early March. A friend who lived in my old neighborhood sent me a picture of a "for sale" sign on my parents' front lawn. It was listed as a distressed sale, meaning they had to sell quickly to avoid foreclosure. The price was significantly lower than the market value, a direct consequence of the bank's pressure and their damaged credit. They were forced to sell the house I had spent 5 years paying for. The house where my mother had called me a burden. They didn't make a profit. After paying off the massive mortgage they had taken out against my name and the realtor fees, they were left with very little. My father kept his job, but his income alone wasn't enough to rent a place of a similar size. They ended up in a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. The media room was gone. The new deck was a memory. And Julian, the pride and joy, had to move in with them. His studio was now the 2nd bedroom, a cramped space he shared with his boxes of useless video equipment. His grand ambitions had collided with the hard wall of reality. Without the bank of Evelyn, his artistic endeavors came to a screeching halt. I heard through the family grapevine that he was forced to get a real job, working in the warehouse of an online retailer. The shock to his system was apparently profound. As for me, my life blossomed. My credit score recovered within a year. With the money I saved, I bought a beautiful condo in a neighborhood I loved. My pottery skills improved, and my apartment was filled with my own creations, tangible proof of the life I was building with my own two hands. I was promoted at work. I traveled. I fell in love with a kind, stable man who saw me as a partner, not a resource. I never spoke to my parents or my brother again. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful reunion. Their betrayal was too deep, the deception too calculated. They had made their choice on Thanksgiving Day, and I had simply honored it. They had placed their pride in their son and their comfort in my silence. They learned, the hard way, the true price of that pride. It cost them their home, their lifestyle, and their daughter. And it was a debt I was no longer willing to pay.